We are with Michael Prazan. You are a documentary filmmaker. You are doing historic documentary. Could you tell us more about what you do?
I directed many documentary films, all based on history research, history material, so also archives. My work depends on the use of the archives, and but I treated many different subjects. For example, my first documentary film, I produced it myself because I was not a documentary filmmaker at this time, and no one was waiting for me. It was about a very complicated subject. It was about the student movement in the late 60s in Japan, and also its extension a few years later into international terrorist group, which was called the Japanese Red Army. So, I remember for this film, I could find a very incredible archive material filmed by the students themselves in the heart of the student movement at the time, and it was given to me by the leader of the student movement at the time, and I didn't know about it, but making the interview with him, he could give me this sample, and I could use it in my film. And then I treated many different subjects, always about history, always about touchy subjects, sometimes, for example, the Nanjing massacre perpetrated by the Japanese in China in 1937. So it's a very old massacre, but it still have repercussions into the era and between the relationship between the two countries, Japan and China nowadays. So it's always about history linked with the situation and issue of today. And on that perspective, my last film that was screened in a TV channel in France was about the history of the Muslim Brotherhood, which we know quite well right now because of what happened those last 2 years, but it's a very ancient movement that started in 1928. So I start narrating the story from 1928 until today, based on many different kind of archives as well. Sometimes very difficult to find, but it was very difficult but interesting research to do to find those archives. And the last film that I've done, that I've directed, it's not yet on TV. I think it will be screened maybe early January. It's about the history of the American immigration through the eye of a very important and symbolic place, which is called Ellis Island. It was the immigration center where all the immigrants from Europe mainly, but also from Arab countries would immigrate to, and Caribbean as well, would immigrate to the United States from the late 19th century until 1954. So during that period, it's also, I would use a lot of archives at this time, from the very ancient, maybe the most ancient archive I've ever used, directed by Thomas Edison, maybe in 1900, filming the Ellis Island at the time. And it is also a history of how the United States, that we know, has been built at this time by the immigrants, mostly. So I follow also some destinies. For example, Lucky Luciano, who entered in Ellis Island in 1907, who would become the inventor of the mafia in the East Coast. We follow also William O'Dwyer, who was a cop, and he finally became the mayor of New York in 1946. And he was the cop who arrested Lucky Luciano, and he was Irish. He entered in the United States just a few years after Lucky Luciano. But we also follow Sam Goldwyn, who was a Jewish immigrant from Poland who invented Hollywood, for example. So it's also a history of the cinema, the beginning of the cinema, and the beginning of all that we know about the United States, the best and the worst, but always through the history of silent. And I had used a lot of archive material to do that film.
And how do you use archive as a documentary filmmaker?
There is, I guess, two main functions. But the most noble one is to use the archive as a testimony of the history. And in that way, it's footage that you don't have to comment. It's just like, it speaks by itself. And I always want to use this kind of archive in my film. It's a testimony of the history, like, for example, a witness of an event that I would cover will testify in front of the camera. The archive is also a material that testifies about something of the history, about something of the event that you have to talk about in the documentary film. So that's the most noble way to use the archive, I guess, is to testify about something, but also, of course, the aesthetic quality of the images is important. And there is another way to use it, which is more illustrative, which is more like setting a fictional or put the archive in a fictional or a narrative way, because sometimes the commentary doesn't, is not enough. You need image to support it. So you have to use the archive like in an illustrative way, even if it doesn't exactly suit precisely the situation that you describe with the commentary, but the people, the audience knows about it, I guess, and he can do the difference between an archive that testifies of something, an archive, an illustrative archive that would help just to narrate the situation that the commentary is doing for the progression of the narrative of the film.
Thank you. And do you think that now it's easier for you as a filmmaker to find archive materials because it is digitized, or is it the same?
Well, I guess the fact that it's digitalized is easier for the editor, of course, because that's everything that you use now to build a documentary, especially a historical documentary that needs, a very different kind of material, the interview that you film, the places that you shot, but also visual material and archives that could be film, of course, but that could be also pictures. So it's a very, you need very different material, kind of material to use it, and everything now is digitalized. So of course it's very much more easier than it could be like 30 years ago, for example. But for the director, it doesn't make any difference. I mean, the archives is always kind of hard to find, especially the one you look for, the one that suits you. For example, I wouldn't use any on my film. I try not to use a subject from the news from TV because it's editing already. So the main work of the archivists, the archive that works with me, for example, is just to find the original, the genuine footage, the rushes that we need. So it's always very, very complicated, and especially my subjects, usually they are international subjects, so we have to look for the archives where they are, and most of the time they are all over the planet. So it's always an international research, and for me, it makes no difference that it could be just like a basic film or digitalized. Maybe the quality is less, it's not so good as it could be if it was not digitalized for many reasons, but it's the only way now to preserve the archives, because when it's not digital, when you don't take care of it, it's too bad to be used, and it can be lost as well. So, there is good and bad at the same way.